My boss fired me to hire his brother. Now the brother's chaos destroyed the entire company. Alright, here's the deal. I worked at this company for 8 years. That's nearly a decade of grinding, putting in overtime, skipping holidays, and being the go-to person whenever something needed fixing. I wasn't just another employee. I built that department from the ground up. By the time I became manager, I knew every corner of the business like the back of my hand. And Carter, my boss? He trusted me. Or at least I thought he did. He used to say things like, "You're the backbone of this place, and I don't know what we'd do without you." I'd always nod, thinking, yeah, you really wouldn't know. So imagine my shock when Carter called me into his office one Tuesday afternoon looking off. His usually confident demeanor was gone. He kept fidgeting with a pen and shuffling some papers like he couldn't meet my eyes. I instantly felt my stomach twist. Something was wrong. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Sure, what's up?" I asked, already dreading the answer. He sighed and finally looked up. "It's not personal," he muttered. I froze. I didn't even need to hear the rest of the sentence to know where this was going. "It's not personal" is corporate speak, for you're about to get screwed over. "We're bringing Ray on board," Carter said, avoiding my gaze again. My jaw clenched. Ray, his younger brother. I'd heard enough about Ray to know that this wasn't a promotion or a transfer. It was a replacement. My replacement. "And what does that mean for me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Carter shifted uncomfortably. "Look, you've been incredible. You really have. But Ray needs a chance to prove himself, and you're firing me," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. He had the audacity to wince like he was the victim here. "I wouldn't put it like that," he said weakly. "But, yes." I sat there, stunned. 8 years of loyalty. 8 years of pouring everything into this job. All wiped away because his brother needed a chance. The worst part? Carter looked relieved that I didn't blow up on him, like he expected me to start yelling or begging, and when I didn't, it made him feel better about himself. "Effective immediately?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. He nodded. "We'll provide a decent severance package. I wish things could have been different." "Sure you do." I spent the rest of that afternoon clearing out my desk, trying to ignore the whispers and sympathetic looks from my team. They knew this wasn't about performance. They knew how hard I worked, and they all knew Ray's reputation. Lazy, entitled, and terrible at pretty much everything he touched. Carter was gambling the entire department on his brother, and he was about to find out the hard way that not all bets pay off. As I walked out of the building for the last time, I kept telling myself it wasn't the end. But the sting of betrayal? That would stay with me for a long time. After I was shown the door, it didn't take long for the chaos to unfold. I may have been out of the building, but I still had plenty of friends on the inside, and they weren't shy about keeping me updated on how things were going under Ray's leadership. Spoiler alert, it was a train wreck from day one. For starters, Ray had no idea what he was doing. The guy had zero experience in our industry and couldn't even grasp the basics of how the department operated. On his first day, he walked into a meeting with a major client and casually suggested completely scrapping their current project because he thought the budget looked too high. This was a project we'd been working on for months, and that had already been approved and paid for. The client wasn't impressed. They pulled the contract 2 days later, but that was just the beginning. Ray had this infuriating mix of arrogance and laziness. He'd show up late, leave early, and delegate tasks he didn't understand to people who were already drowning in work. My team, the team I built, was falling apart under his leadership. One by one, they started quitting, fed up with his incompetence and a complete lack of respect for their time and skills. By the second month, the department was hemorrhaging money. Clients were leaving faster than they could sign new ones. And the few employees who stayed were running on fumes. Carter, to his credit, seemed to realize he'd made a mistake. But instead of admitting it or stepping in to fix things, he doubled down. "He just needs more time," Carter said to anyone who dared to question his decision. Time? Ray was running that department straight into the ground, and Carter was handing him the shovel. The updates I got from my friends were both infuriating and, I'll admit, a little satisfying. Carter had gambled everything on Ray, and the fallout was exactly what I'd warned him about. The department I had spent years building was now a shadow of its former self, and the company was starting to feel the effects. Meanwhile, I was struggling to rebuild my life. No matter how hard I tried to focus on moving forward, The bitterness of how it all went down was hard to shake. But as I kept hearing about Ray's growing disaster, one thing became increasingly clear. Karma was catching up to Carter and his Golden Boy brother. Little did I know, the worst for them, and the best for me, was still to come. After I was shown the door, it didn't take long for the chaos to unfold. I may have been out of the building, but I still had plenty of friends on the inside, and they weren't shy about keeping me updated on how things were going under Ray's leadership. Spoiler alert, it was a train wreck from day one. For starters, Ray had no idea what he was doing. The guy had zero experience in our industry and couldn't even grasp the basics of how the department operated. On his first day, he walked into a meeting with a major client and casually suggested completely scrapping their current project because he thought the budget looked too high. This was a project we'd been working on for months, and that had already been approved and paid for. The client wasn't impressed. They pulled the contract 2 days later, but that was just the beginning. Ray had this infuriating mix of arrogance and laziness. He'd show up late, leave early, and delegate tasks he didn't understand to people who were already drowning in work. My team, the team I built, was falling apart under his leadership. One by one, they started quitting, fed up with his incompetence and a complete lack of respect for their time and skills. By the second month, the department was hemorrhaging money. Clients were leaving faster than they could sign new ones. And the few employees who stayed were running on fumes. Carter, to his credit, seemed to realize he'd made a mistake. But instead of admitting it or stepping in to fix things, he doubled down. He just needs more time, Carter said to anyone who dared to question his decision. Time? Ray was running that department straight into the ground, and Carter was handing him the shovel. The updates I got from my friends were both infuriating and, I'll admit, a little satisfying. Carter had gambled everything on Ray, and the fallout was exactly what I'd warned him about. The department I had spent years building was now a shadow of its former self, and the company was starting to feel the effects. Meanwhile, I was struggling to rebuild my life. No matter how hard I tried to focus on moving forward, the bitterness of how it all went down was hard to shake. But as I kept hearing about Ray's growing disaster, one thing became increasingly clear. Karma was catching up to Carter and his Golden Boy brother. Little did I know, the worst for them, and the best for me, was still to come. While Ray was busy tanking the department, I was out in the real world trying to rebuild my life. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. Losing that job hit me like a freight train. I hadn't just lost a paycheck. I lost a part of my identity. For years, I'd poured everything I had into that role. Late nights, weekends, missed holidays, all because I believed in what I was doing and thought I was valued. Turns out, I was wrong. I applied to dozens of jobs, but every interview felt like a kick to the gut. Why did you leave your last position? They'd ask, and I'd have to dance around the truth, saying, oh, I was fired because my boss gave my job to his deadbeat brother. It didn't exactly scream, hire me. Money got tight fast. My savings dwindled, and I started questioning everything. Was I really as good at my job as I thought? Was I replaceable after all? Imposter syndrome hit hard. And then there was the isolation. I didn't realize how much my work life was tied to my social life until it was gone. No morning chats with my team, no shared jokes about the office coffee machine breaking down again. Just me, alone, scrolling through job boards and waiting for a callback that never came. But in the darkest moments, I found something I hadn't had in years. Time. Time to think, time to breathe, time to figure out what I wanted for a change. It wasn't easy, but slowly I started to shift my focus. I reached out to old colleagues for advice, polished my resume, and started targeting companies where I knew my skills would be appreciated. And while the rejection letters still stung, I kept pushing. Little by little, things started to turn around. I landed a freelance project here, a short-term gig there. It wasn't stable, but it was something. And as I began to regain my confidence, I realized that Carter's betrayal, as painful as it was, might have been the wake-up call I needed. Still, I couldn't shake the bitterness. Every time I thought about how I'd been tossed aside, my blood boiled. And whenever I heard updates about Ray's disastrous leadership, I couldn't help but think, they deserve every bit of this. But what I didn't know was that karma wasn't done yet. Because as bad as things were for Carter and Ray, they were about to get a whole lot worse. By month 4, things at the company had gone from bad to catastrophic. I heard all the juicy details from former colleagues who had either quit or been laid off as the ship started sinking. Ray was completely out of his depth. He had no clue how to manage projects, much less people. and deadlines were missed left and right, and his idea of solving problems was to blame everyone but himself. Clients started dropping out faster than Carter could beg them to stay. One of my old coworkers, Sarah, called me one evening. "You won't believe this," she said, her voice half amused, half outraged. "Ray forgot to send a crucial contract to a client, one worth millions. The client pulled out, and now the whole company's in panic mode." "Are you serious?" I asked, trying not to laugh. "Oh, it gets better," she said. "He tried to blame the accounting team for it. Accounting! Like they have anything to do with client contracts." Apparently, Ray's incompetence had created a domino effect. With key clients pulling out, revenue plummeted. Carter, desperate to save face, has started micromanaging everyone, something he'd never done before. But it was too little, and too late. Employees who had stuck it out for years were leaving in droves. The ones who stayed were miserable, overworked, and counting down the days until they found an exit strategy. The department I had built with so much care had crumbled into chaos. But the real kicker came a few weeks later when I got another call, this time from an old friend in the finance department. "Did you hear about the quarterly earnings report?" she asked, barely able to contain her glee. "No, what happened?" I asked, curious. "They're officially in the red," she said. "The company's losing money faster than they can cut costs. And get this, Carter had to cancel his own bonus to cover payroll this month." I couldn't help but smile. Carter, who had always flaunted his big bonuses and fancy vacations, was now scrambling to keep the lights on, all because he'd chosen loyalty to his brother over logic. But as satisfying as it was to see karma do its thing, I didn't expect what came next. A phone call from Carter himself. I was at home one afternoon going over a freelance project when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. "Hello?" "Hey, it's Carter." For a second, I didn't even respond. Hearing his voice after everything that had happened threw me off. What could he possibly want now? Hi, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. There was an awkward pause before he spoke again. "Look, I know this is unexpected, but I was wondering if we could talk." Talk? I thought. What could we possibly have to discuss? But instead of saying that, I asked, "What's this about?" Carter cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll get straight to the point. Things aren't going well here. The department's, struggling." That was the understatement of the century. "And you want—" "What, exactly?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "I need your help," he admitted, his voice almost cracking. "Ray, he's not working out. We've lost clients, key employees, and frankly, the company's on the brink. I need someone who knows the business, someone I can trust to come back and help me fix this." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. Trust. He had the nerve to say he trusted me, after tossing me aside like yesterday's trash. "Why me?" I asked, my tone sharper now. "You made it pretty clear that I was replaceable." Carter let out a heavy sigh. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I made a mistake. Ray—" He wasn't ready. And honestly, I should have never let you go. I see that now. I didn't say anything for a moment, letting him stew in his own desperation. The satisfaction I felt was almost overwhelming. For months, I'd been struggling to get back on my feet while he and Ray had run the company into the ground. And now, here he was, begging me to come back and save it. But then he hit me with the kicker. "I'll double your old salary if you return." Double. That was no small offer. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect. Something Carter had stripped away from me when he replaced me with his brother. "I need some time to think about it," I said, wanting to savor this moment a little longer. "Of course," he replied quickly, like he was afraid I'd hang up. "Take as much time as you need. Just, please, think about it. I can't do this without you." When I hung up, I couldn't help but laugh. Carter had spent months cleaning up after Ray's mess, only to realize what he'd thrown away. And now, the ball was in my court. After hanging up the phone, I sat in silence, letting the weight of Carter's words settle over me. He needed me back. Not just back, but urgently, desperately enough to offer double my previous salary. It should have felt like a victory, a vindication of my worth. But instead, it left me hollow. The logical side of me whispered that this was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Financial security, a chance to rebuild my career, and the satisfaction of walking back into the office as the savior. But then the memories crept in. The months after I was fired, filled with endless rejection, dwindling savings, and sleepless nights replayed in my mind. Carter's decision to replace me with Ray had thrown my life into chaos, and now he wanted me to clean up the mess he'd created. The anger was undeniable, but it wasn't enough to make a clear decision. I needed to step back and think. That evening I tried to process everything rationally. The offer was generous, almost too generous. But I couldn't ignore the underlying motivations. Carter wasn't asking me back out of respect or an apology. He was desperate, clinging to the one person who could save the company from total collapse. I grabbed a notepad and began to list the pros and cons. The positives were obvious. The money would be life-changing. I knew the job better than anyone, and it might even repair my professional reputation. But the negatives were just as compelling. Accepting meant returning to a toxic environment and working under someone who had already betrayed me. It meant stepping into the wreckage left by Ray and shouldering the burden of fixing it, all while knowing I was just a convenient solution to Carter's problem. As the list grew longer, the emotional weight of the decision became impossible to ignore. Carter's actions had sent a clear message months ago. I was replaceable. He'd watched me walk out of the building without hesitation, confident that Ray could take my place. His current plea didn't erase that. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, torn between the practical benefits of accepting the offer and the lingering sting of betrayal. Every time I leaned toward saying yes, I remembered the humiliation of being discarded so casually. Every time I considered saying no, the thought of what I could gain tempted me again. By the time the sun rose, I'd made up my mind. Carter's desperation wasn't my problem to fix. He'd made his choice, and now he had to live with it. Accepting his offer might have brought financial stability, but it would come at the cost of my self-respect, and that was a price I wasn't willing to pay. With a steadying breath, I picked up my phone, ready to deliver the decision that felt both empowering and final. The morning I called Carter back, the air felt heavier than usual, like the world was holding its breath. My decision was clear, but that didn't make it any easier. Carter had been my boss for nearly a decade, someone I once respected and trusted. Telling him no wasn't just about rejecting the job, it was about setting a boundary that I hadn't been strong enough to set before. As the phone rang, I found myself thinking back to the day he'd fired me. The look of discomfort on his face. The way he avoided my eyes as he muttered, "It's not personal." Those words had haunted me for months, playing on a loop whenever doubt crept in. But now, they fueled me. Carter answered after just a couple of rings, his voice filled with cautious optimism. He must have thought the offer had worked, that I was calling to accept. I started by thanking him for the opportunity and acknowledging the generous offer. It felt important to maintain professionalism, even if my emotions were in anything but. Then, as gently but firmly as I could, I told him I wasn't coming back. For a moment there was silence on the other end of the line. I imagined him sitting there stunned, the reality of my refusal sinking in. When he finally spoke, his tone had shifted, less hopeful, more desperate. He tried to reason with me, throwing out promises of flexibility, higher bonuses, even a leadership role beyond my old position. But the more he spoke, the more certain I became. Every offer, every plea only highlighted how little he'd thought of me until now. If he truly valued me, I wouldn't have been replaced so easily in the first place. I explained that I had moved on, that I was building something new for myself and I couldn't step back into the past. Carter sounded genuinely shaken, but I wasn't about to let that guilt sway me. This wasn't about him. It was about me finally standing up for my worth. When the call ended, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a tinge of sadness. For years I had poured my heart into that company, believing it was my future. Walking away felt like closing the door on a significant chapter of my life. But as I put the phone down, a new feeling emerged. Pride. Saying no wasn't just a rejection of the job. It was a declaration of my self-respect, a reminder to myself that I deserved better than to be someone's afterthought. The chapter with Carter and his company was officially closed, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was truly free. The days following my call with Carter were surreal. I expected to feel regret or second-guess my decision, but instead, I felt an unexpected calm. For months, I had been carrying the weight of his betrayal, and now it felt like I'd finally let it go. Saying no had been more than a decision. It had been a release, but Carter's desperation wasn't over. Word got back to me through Sarah and a few other former colleagues. Apparently my refusal had thrown him into full-blown panic mode. Without me to clean up the mess, he was scrambling to keep the department afloat. Ray, predictably, was nowhere to be found. After months of mismanagement, missed deadlines, and alienating nearly every employee and client, he had quietly resigned from his position. Rumor had it Carter had begged him to stay, but even Ray knew there was no salvaging his reputation. With no one left to turn to, Carter was forced to take on the work himself, but his years in a leadership role had left him rusty, and he was woefully unprepared for the sheer volume of responsibilities. Projects were collapsing left and right, employees were leaving in waves, and clients were withdrawing their business faster than Carter could replace them. Then came the financial fallout. The company's quarterly reports showed devastating losses, far worse than anyone had anticipated. Investors pulled out, and layoffs became a grim reality. Sarah told me that by the end of the quarter, the once thriving department I had built was reduced to a skeleton crew. Hearing about the company's downward spiral brought mixed emotions. A part of me felt vindicated, knowing that Carter's decision to replace me with Ray had directly led to his downfall. But another part of me couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. I had poured years of my life into that place, and seeing it crumble wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. Meanwhile, my own life had taken a turn for the better. After months of freelancing, I had landed a full-time role at a new company, one that genuinely valued my experience and skills. The team was collaborative, the leadership was supportive, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly appreciated. The irony wasn't lost on me. Carter had spent months trying to repair the damage he caused, while I was thriving in a role that respected my worth. It was proof that sometimes walking away from a bad situation is the best thing you can do. But Carter's story wasn't over yet, and neither was mine. What happened next was something I never saw coming. Just as I was settling into my new role, life threw me a curveball. One evening, after a long but fulfilling day at work, I got an email that stopped me in my tracks. It was from Carter. The subject line read, "One last try." I hesitated before opening it. Part of me didn't want to know what he had to say. I had moved on, and I didn't need the drama. But curiosity got the better of me. The email was long, filled with carefully chosen words, but the gist of it was clear. Carter was still desperate. He admitted that the company was on its last legs. Ray's incompetence had been the nail in the coffin, and my refusal to return had sealed their fate. Now, clients had abandoned them, employees were fleeing, and their reputation in the industry was in tatters. Carter pleaded for me to reconsider. He didn't just offer more money this time. He promised creative control over the department, full autonomy, and a hefty signing bonus. He even went as far as to say that I could reshape the company however I saw fit. It was an offer that, under different circumstances, would have been a dream come true. But I wasn't the same person who had left that office months ago. The betrayal still lingered in my mind, and no amount of money or power could erase the way Carter had made me feel disposable. What struck me most about the email, though, was the tone. Beneath the formalities and promises, there was a sense of defeat, a man who had realized far too late that he had gambled everything and lost. I closed my laptop without replying. I didn't need to. The person I was now didn't crave the validation of going back. I had found my worth elsewhere, in a company that respected me from the start. A few days later, I ran into Sarah during a casual meetup with old colleagues. Over drinks, I mentioned the email, and she wasn't surprised. "He's been reaching out to a few others, too," she said, shaking her head. "But nobody's biting. The company's reputation is shot." It was strange hearing that. The place where I had once poured my heart and soul was now a sinking ship, and no one wanted to be part of the cleanup crew. For the first time, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't bitter anymore. I was free. And Carter? He was stuck in the quicksand of his own choices, with no one left to pull him out. But there was still one final chapter to the story, and it was one I never could have predicted. A few months after Carter's email, life had fully turned around for me. My new job wasn't just a paycheck. It was a place where I felt valued and respected. I was thriving in ways I never thought possible, leading exciting projects and building meaningful relationships with my team. Then one day, I got another call from Sarah. "Did you hear?" she asked, her voice tinged with equal parts disbelief and amusement. "Hear what?" I asked, curious, but already guessing it had something to do with Carter. "The company filed for bankruptcy," she said. It's official. They're shutting down." I wasn't surprised. The writing had been on the wall for months, but hearing it confirmed still made me pause. Carter's company, the place I had dedicated 8 years of my life to, was gone. It wasn't just the end of a business, it was the end of an era. Sarah filled me in on the details. After months of hemorrhaging money, failed attempts to secure new clients, and a mass exodus of employees, Carter had no choice but to close the doors for good. Even Ray, the golden boy who started it all, had apparently vanished, leaving Carter to face the fallout alone. What struck me most wasn't the company's collapse, but the fact that I felt no satisfaction in hearing it. I didn't need to revel in Carter's downfall to feel validated. The real victory wasn't in watching his failure, it was in realizing how far I'd come since the day he fired me. Walking away from that job had been one of the hardest things I could ever done, but it had also been the best decisions of my life. Losing that position forced me to confront my own worth, to stop tying my value to someone else's approval, and to take control of my future. Carter's company may have crumbled, but I was thriving. And the pain of his betrayal had turned into fuel for my success, pushing me to find a workplace where my contributions were truly appreciated. Now, when I look back at everything that happened, I see it as a blessing in disguise. Carter thought he could replace me, and for a while, I believed it too. But the truth was, I wasn't replaceable, and neither was my self-respect. As for Carter, I haven't heard from him since that last email. Maybe he's moved on, or maybe he's still trying to pick up the pieces of the life he built on poor decisions. Either way, his story is no longer mine to tell. This is my story, the one where I lost everything only to find something better. Sometimes walking away isn't just the best option. It's the only one. And that, my friends, is the story of how I said no to my old boss and yes to my future.